So, should we be celebrating these big Supreme Court decisions or mourning them?
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, biblical scholar and cultural commentator, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice for moral sanity and spiritual clarity. Call 866-34-TRUTH to get on The Line of Fire. And now, here's your host, Dr. Michael Brown.
So, how should we view these major Supreme Court decisions as followers of Jesus? The Supreme Court ruling against ongoing affirmative action in our colleges and universities. The Supreme Court ruling in favor of a Christian graphic artist and web designer, saying that she did not have to create content that violated her convictions and beliefs. And then the Supreme Court siding with a Christian postal worker who said that he shouldn't be forced to work on Sundays. Are these great decisions? Are these decisions that are good for the American people? Are these decisions that are in keeping with our constitutional rights and the intent and goals of our country? Are they mixed? Is this a day of celebration, a day of mourning, all the decisions coming last week? As tomorrow is July 4th, do we go into the holiday saying, wonderful, the Supreme Court really got things right, or terrible, the Supreme Court really got things wrong? Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Brown. I am so glad that you tuned in today. It's always our goal to look at what's happening in the world around us and then to bring a biblical perspective to it, not a politically partisan perspective, not a Republican versus Democrat, right versus left perspective, but a biblically based perspective to think things through logically, to not react emotionally or just based on our own upbringing, tradition, environment, but to step back and to get some wisdom from God and to really think these issues through in a non-emotional way, because they're hot-button issues, and there's tremendous division in our country over this, even in the first two decisions in particular, the majority opinion versus the dissenting opinion. I mean, there is some fireworks between the two. In one case, Justice Gorsuch said, the second case that we're talking about with the Christian graphic artist, said, it looked like Justice Sotomayor's dissenting opinion was talking about a completely different case. He said she reimagined the facts from beginning to end. And then you have the two African-American Supreme Court justices, so Justice Thomas and Justice Jackson, massive clash over the affirmative action issue. So a lot to talk about and unpack. And I really welcome you to weigh in with your own viewpoint. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. There's a lot happening in the world today. The ongoing riots and upheaval in France say it could be a civil war there. There is major conflict in Israel after a terrorist attack killed Israelis and settlers, Jewish settlers fighting back with violence against Palestinians. Now a major government operation in Jenin in the West Bank, so-called West Bank, Judea, Samaria. A lot going on around the world. But we're going to focus on these. These are big, big decisions. I'm first going to look at the question of freedom of speech, compelled speech, and the Christian graphic designer and graphic artist and web designer Lorie Smith. And again, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3, saying that she could not be compelled to create content that was contrary to her own beliefs. Now, let's just say someone approaches her, graphic artist, web designer, and she gets to know the person. It turns out it's a gay couple. And they say, we've got a florist shop, and we'd love for you to create a website for us for our florist shop. She says, no, I won't do it because you're gay. No, the case did not give her the right to do that. That would be discrimination. Just like if a black couple or a Jewish couple or an Asian American couple or whoever the couple is, if they came to the same person and said, we'd like you to do a website for us, and she said, no, I won't because you're black or because you're Jewish or because you're Asian, that would be discrimination. That's not what this case was about. This case was about creating content that violated her convictions and beliefs. The way it's being portrayed is that this is now giving Christians the right to discriminate. Let's listen to what the representative from GLAAD, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which I renamed years ago the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Disagreement, because that's what it came down to in many cases. Let's listen to what she had to say.
She is the president of GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. What's your reaction, and what do you have to say to Major's point just now about that concern that this is going to lead to further eradication of rights?
I mean, I think what this is the beginnings of a license to discriminate against LGBTQ folks in America. This has been something that the court has wanted to do. They signaled last year in the Dobbs decision that they were coming after our marriages. Clarence Thomas specifically spoke about the Obergefell decision. And I think this is a step in the direction of doing that, of continuing to push us as second-class citizens, as continuing to make us discriminated against. This is legalizing discrimination for this particular company in this particular instance.
100% wrong. 100% wrong. Whether the Supreme Court wants to at some point address the egregious decision to redefine marriage 8 years ago in the Obergefell decision, that's a totally separate issue. All right? But look at the way this is being presented. Here, I've got a new article up, Questions for Those Who Differ with the SCOTUS decision in favor of a Christian graphic artist. You can read it on our website, AskDrBrown.org, AskDrBrown.org. Let's listen to what Clara Jeffrey said. She's the editor-in-chief of Mother Jones. Quote, perhaps gay stylists, designers, caterers, and planners should start withholding services from Christian conservatives and see where that goes. That's not what this is about at all, as I'm going to illustrate for you with a series of questions in a moment. How about actor Michael Imperioli, who posted on Instagram, quote, I've decided to forbid bigots and homophobes from watching The Sopranos, The White Lotus, Goodfellas, or any movie or TV show I've been in. Thank you, Supreme Court, for allowing me to discriminate and exclude those I don't agree with, and I'm opposed to USA. The court did no such thing. And it's a little frustrating to see how easy it is to push people's buttons and to get them to respond to something that is not the case whatsoever. So allow me to ask this series of questions. I mean, it's just very, very basic. Should a gay web designer be compelled by the state to design a website for a counseling service that helps people overcome same-sex attraction? You're a gay web designer? Counseling services, we'd like you to design the site for us. Should the state compel that person to do it? Should an Orthodox Jewish web designer be compelled to design a website for Jews for Jesus? Should an atheist web designer be compelled by the state to design a website called Answering Atheists? Should a trans-identified web designer be compelled by the state to design a website on the dangers of hormone therapy and sex change therapy? Should a Muslim web designer be compelled by the state to design a website for a meat service specializing in pork products? Should an African-American web designer be compelled by the state to design a website selling Confederate flags? Should a Christian web designer be compelled by the state to design an adultery hookup website? Should any web designer be compelled by the state to design a pornography website? If Jeffrey or Imperioli were website designers, should the state be able to compel them to create pro-Trump content for a Republican lobbyist or content stating that he won the 2020 elections? The answer to all these questions is obvious. None of these people should be compelled to create content that violates their beliefs or convictions. The state has no right to compel them to do so. What about a gay-owned T-shirt company? Should they be compelled by the state to design a T-shirt with the words, God does not recognize same-sex marriage? Should a Christian-owned printing company be compelled by the state to design flyers for a Satan conference? The list goes on and on. The answer in every case is no. Here, it has nothing to do with refusing someone's services because of their ethnicity, because of their skin color, because of their religious beliefs, because of their sexual orientation. It has nothing to do with any of that. Even the question of putting the sexual orientation in that same category, that's not even under debate here. Rather, the question is, should the state have the right to compel someone to create content, to create artistic content contrary to the beliefs? I mean, who would even question this? The ruling should have been 9-0. Should have been a slam dunk, of course. Let me share with you a text that my friend, Attorney Joe Infranco, he was the lead attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom for many years. He shot me this text in response to my article. He said, people do not know the record, speaking specifically of Colorado, from the Jack Phillips Baker case, also out of Colorado. So This was someone who declined to bake a cake for a same-sex couple. In other words, I'm going to design a cake for your same-sex wedding ceremony. So I can't do that. Buy any cake you want here in the store. Do business here all you want. Served you for years. That's not the issue. But no, I can't create artistic content that violates my beliefs. So this has been going on for years. And then after that case, then another case was provoked against him. Joe and Franco said the court well remembered that case and mentioned it in passing from the likelihood that there was a real threat of prosecution in current case. In Jack's case, we asked the Colorado Human Rights Commissioners in depositions the same type inquiries. The Jewish baker making a cake with a neo-Nazi message, a gay baker for a Westboro Baptist message, quote, God hates fags, that's what they used to proclaim, and so on. In Jack's case, no one would ever be compelled to create a cake with that offensive message. The only exception was the Christian baker for an SS wedding. They said, yeah, a same-sex wedding, yeah, you have to be compelled to do that. We stressed that point for Justice Kennedy. He was furious over it and consequently wrote a strong decision in our favor. In any other context, this wouldn't even be a question. An environmental activist website designer creating a site for a group claiming climate change is a fraud? A Democrat designer for a Republican attack piece on Biden? It's a common sense in any other context. Gorsuch made an interesting observation that someone reading the majority and dissent opinions would think the authors were addressing two different cases. This is a worldview collision between people who recognize that rights come from a higher source than government and others who elevate relativism and collectivism and insist there cannot be dissent from government orthodoxy. Each side has trouble understanding how the opposing side sees the world so differently. Just one example. Colorado would include mandatory re-education of offenders. Gorsuch mentioned that point, clearly disturbed by it. It sounds like a page from Mao's playbook. Our side hears that detail with horror. To the left, it is simply a good way to remove dissent. This is the world we are living in today, friends. Thank God the court made a sane decision. What a shame that the rest of society doesn't see it like that. May God help us to bring truth and awakening to those whose hearts and minds are blinded by their wrong ideologies. We'll be right back. Hey friends, Michael Brown here. Many of you know about the radical health transformation in my own life. Starting August of 2014, went from 275 pounds to 180 pounds, less than 8 months, not by dieting, but by radical lifestyle transformation, getting rid of the bad, unhealthy things, eating only healthy foods. I've kept it up by God's grace now for 9 years, going from 3 headaches a week to no headaches in 9 years. Blood pressure as high as 149 over 103, now maybe 105 over 70 on average. I mean, radical transformation. And I encourage you to look at your life, look at your diet, ask, are you going in the right direction, or do you need to make some changes? I also want to help you on a very practical level. I have added into my life as well some great supplements from our co-sponsor, Trivita. In fact, that's why we work with them, because I have personally benefited from these as well. I want to commend to you 3 in particular. Nitric Oxide, which helps with blood flow, oxygen, energy level. MyoHealth, which helps with skeletal structure, muscle, which is really important as you get older. And Nopalea, which deals with chronic inflammation. And in fact, I've learned that that's the #1 killer worldwide, chronic inflammation. I take these 3 supplements every single day. As I travel around the world, I travel with these, and I want to encourage you strongly, check them out for yourselves. 800-771-5584. Get your free online health consultation. 800-771-5584, or go to Trivita.com. Use the code BROWN25. You will get a 25% discount on your entire order, whatever size it is, and 100% of your first order. Line of fire, and more than a tithe of all subsequent orders. I use these. I commend them to you. 800-771-5584.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Once again, my shout out of appreciation to our co-sponsor, Trivita. We say co-sponsor because you were the ones, along with Trivita, you were the ones that help us on the air every single day, help us get into new cities, help us reach more people. Friends, we're here to help. We're here to infuse you with faith, truth, and courage. Pastors, leaders that listen, you know that we're doing what we can to help serve you because you're on the front lines with 1,000,001 responsibilities already. So we'll do the heavy lifting here and the digging here and the working hard here and then do our best to bring that material to you. You can say, hey, great, here it is concisely, clearly, and hopefully over the decades of serving the Lord and serving you, we've earned your trust to know that it's not a political agenda we're pushing. It's not a human agenda we're pushing. We're really seeking to exalt Jesus, preach truth, bring liberty, bring freedom, bring healing, restoration, repentance to our land. 866-34-TRUTH. You can weigh in on the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. Good decision or bad decision? Move forward or move backwards? I'm going to get into that momentarily. I just want to share this with everybody. Think for a minute. How many times in these last 2+ years of the Biden presidency, how many times have you heard me bashing Joe Biden? Or let's this. Have you ever heard me make fun of his errors, his speech errors or his cognitive errors? Have you ever heard me do that? Once, a single time. Have you ever seen a single post where I've done that? No, doesn't exist. Do you hear me constantly going after Biden, Harris, and all the bad things and bad decisions? Do you hear me doing that day and night? Do you hear me railing on AOC day and night? And on this one day, you don't hear me doing that. Why? Because that's not my focus. Oh, there are issues where I have profound differences with the president, and I'll address those, but that's not my focus. This is not a conservative radio show. This is certainly not a Republican radio show. For the record, I'm a registered independent. It's none of those things. It is a Bible-based, kingdom-based show which addresses what's happening in the culture. And look, there are plenty of people, just evangelists. They're preaching to the lost to win the lost. There are plenty of others, they're just Bible teachers, building up the body in the word, etc. There are plenty of others with ministries of compassion, just feeding the poor, caring for the sick, etc. And they're each doing critically important things in the body. This is also something that must be done. We must understand what's happening in the world around us, and we must be able to address it. All right, so here's the deal. I'm not a legal scholar. Like anyone else, I can read, I can think, I can analyze, but I am not a legal scholar. And I'm not coming at this as a legal scholar, nor am I an expert in the educational system in terms of just how things are run in America. Yes, I'm an educator. I've been teaching at or leading ministry schools, Bible schools for over 40 years now, actively involved in the formation of a new one that'll be in Jerusalem, which by God's grace is going to be very exciting. So I'm an educator, but I'm not an expert on our school systems here in America, the strengths and weaknesses. I know tons of homeschoolers and folks who work in Christian schools, but I'm not coming at this as an expert as much as an observer, all right? So the Supreme Court, again, 6-3 decision, said it's time to move on from affirmative action. So here's what President Biden had to say about this, and this is an area where I want to hear what he had to say and then express some differences. And then I want to share some perspectives from leading African-American university professors, because I think it's important to hear things from perspective of those who are absolutely not unaware of our history, but who have a real difference with affirmative action. And then I want to present what I think needs to be done in the interest of all Americans. Okay, listen to what the president had to say first.
For 45 years, the United States Supreme Court has recognized the college's freedom to decide how to build diverse student bodies and to meet their responsibility of opening doors of opportunity for every single American. In case after case, including recently, just as a few years ago in 2016, the court has affirmed and reaffirmed this view that colleges could use race not as a determinative factor for admission, but as one of the factors among many in deciding who to admit from a already qualified pool of applicants. Today, the court once again walked away from decades of precedent and as the dissent has made clear. The dissent states in today's decision, quote, rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress, end of quote. I agree with that statement from the dissent.
All right, so here are some of the issues and the problems, all right? There's no question that we still have a disparity in America in terms of educational levels, salaries, job opportunities for African Americans compared to white Americans, and then even more compared to Asian Americans. There's no question the disparity exists. There's no question that some of the reason for the disparity has to do with our history. That's self-evident and obvious. The question is, was affirmative action in an ongoing way the right solution to the problem? And did it do good for one group without doing harm to another group? There were Asian Americans who brought this case saying, hey, wait a second. We worked hard. We wanted to get into these elite schools, but there was a quota or there was an affirmative action issue, in which case we got discriminated against to pave the way for an African American student to come in, and that's not American, and that's not fair, and that's not right. So that's how this case came about. So on the one hand, and anyone weigh in, is it right to discriminate against one group, to treat another group unfairly in the interest of trying to treat a former group fairly? Do you treat Group A unfairly in order to treat Group B fairly? Is that right? And I think most of us would say no. Okay, well then what's the solution? Second question is, was affirmative action producing the desired results? And it's here there's a very fascinating observation from Professor Walter Williams, well-known African-American university professor, economist, passed away a few years ago. He's got some really interesting things to say, that it has hurt black students. And then African-American professor Glenn Lowry. In fact, let me read what he had to say first. This was in autumn 2022 article in City Journal. He says the United States has a problem with persisting racial equality. That's his perspective. It is in part a legacy of our ignoble past, the institution of chattel slavery and a century of unfreedom and unequal citizenship for African Americans after emancipation. Americans have a moral imperative to redress the consequences of that past. So Lowry's saying this is something in our past and we need to address it. But affirmative action isn't the remedy for this problem. It's a distraction. He said that doesn't mean that affirmative action should never be practiced, that it's morally wrong, and that it can never be a suitable policy. Those are separate questions. Racial inequality is deep and abiding, showing no sign of going away, and we are a lesser nation for it. Yet while affirmative action helps to obtain an adequate representation of diverse ethnic groups at elite institutions of higher education, it imposes serious costs. One interesting factor is that many of the students who are getting into these institutions because of affirmative action are actually children of recent African immigrants who've come in many cases in better situations than those that have been here for generations. And it's their kids getting into these schools simply based on their skin color, even though they don't have the historic disadvantages that other African Americans do. Obviously, that was not the intent of this. But I want to come back to what Walter Williams had to say. It's a very interesting observation in terms of how this is actually hurting many black students, and then talk about where solutions might lie, how we can address this ongoing disparity, what some of the solutions are. We'll talk about that when we come back. Hey friends, this is Dr. Michael Brown. I want to invite you to join our support team. Make an investment of $1 a day that will absolutely last forever. You know, the Lord has given us a holy mandate to blanket America with the Line of Fire broadcast. And on a regular basis, we hear from folks writing in, Dr. Brown, I used to be a practicing homosexual. I listened to you. I heard grace and truth together. I was changed. We hear from pastors who say, thank you for speaking with compassion, but giving us backbone and courage. And we know across America, so many believers are getting healthy and strong through listening to the broadcast, through listening to these messages as we tackle the controversies, the most difficult issues of the day. We even hear from former Muslims who've come to faith, from Jewish people who now believe in Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah, through this broadcast and our resources. So join our support team. $1 or more per day makes you an official Torchbearer. Immediately, you will get access to hundreds of hours of terrific online classes and exclusive video content. Every single month, we'll send you a brand new audio message, and along with it, an insider prayer newsletter where we'll talk about the things that are going to be coming in our ministry and share some of the amazing testimonies of the fruit that you are a part of. And when you do sign up, I want to give you 2 books as a special gift. First, Compassionate Father, A Consuming Fire. Who is the God of the Old Testament? I take the best of my Hebrew and Old Testament scholarship, wrap it together in this book that you'll find eye-opening, answering many of the questions you have. And then Revolution, my classic book that tells you how to wage war to Jesus way, overcoming evil with good, overcoming hatred with love. We are transformed. We can bring transformation to the nation. So call this number now, 800-538-5275. That's 800-538-5275. Say, I'd like to become a torchbearer, or go to AskDrBrown.org. Click on Donate Monthly Support.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome to the Line of Fire broadcast. 866-34-TRUTH is the number to call. I might just get to a random call on any subject you want to talk to me about, any Bible, theology, cultural subject you want to talk to me about, Hebrew, Greek, whatever. I might get to some calls. So you can call in 866-348-7884. Maybe a little later in the broadcast we'll get to your calls. Okay, so here's what Walter Williams wrote, the late Professor Williams. It was actually July 4th of 2018, so almost exactly 5 years ago. The article was titled College Destruction of Black Students. College Destruction of Black Students. He mentioned Amy Wax, University of Pennsylvania law professor, that she had come under attack and scathing criticism because she dared criticize the school's racial preferences program. She was speaking with Brown University economist Glenn Loury himself, a Black American, discussing affirmative action, and she mentioned how racial preferences hinder the ability of blacks to succeed academically by admitting them into schools in which they are in over their heads. At University of Pennsylvania's 7th-ranked law school, Wax said she doesn't think that she has ever seen a black law student graduate in the top quarter of his class, and rarely is a black student in the top half. Now, is that because of a inherent lack of mental acuity, mental sharpness in a black student versus a white student? God forbid. That'd be an absolute racist concept. God forbid. Blacks aren't as smart as white. No, utter nonsense. Absolute rubbish. That's not the issue at all. The issue is because of affirmative action, these students were getting into schools that they weren't fully capable of being in. In other words, they could have gotten into another college, but they were able to get into a better college because of a racial quota or something like that, or making sure the student body looked more diverse. And therefore, they got into a school and they finished lower in the school, did more poorly, and it ultimately hurts their future, their career, more than helps. Williams said this got her into deep trouble, and she was stripped of her duty of teaching, mandatory first-year class, et cetera, et cetera. But Williams said this one study suggests that Wax is absolutely right about academic mismatch. In the early 1990s, the Law School Admission Council collected 27,000 law student records, representing nearly 90% of accredited law schools. The study found that after the first year, 51% of black law students ranked in the bottom 10th of their class, compared with 5% of white students. 2/3 of black students were in the bottom 5th of their class. Only 10% of blacks were in the top half of their class. 22% of black students in this database hadn't passed the bar exam after 5 attempts, compared with 3% of white test takers. The University of Pennsylvania controversy highlights something very important to black people in the nation. The K-12 education that most blacks receive is grossly fraudulent. Most predominantly black schools are costly yet grossly inferior to predominantly white schools and are in cities where blacks hold considerable political power, such as Baltimore, Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia. In these and other cities, it's not uncommon for there to be high schools where less than 17% of the students test proficient in reading, and often not a single student in such schools test proficient in math. Nonetheless, many receive high school diplomas. So he goes on with this, saying look, this is like getting someone, okay, they're going to fight, get in the boxing ring for their first fight against a champion. Or you don't do that, they're going to get knocked out. It's not going to help them at all. And he says you might have the potential to be a good boxer, but you're going to get your brains beaten out before you learn how to bob and weave. Williams says the fact that black students have low class rankings at such high-powered law schools as the University of Pennsylvania doesn't mean that they're stupid or uneducable. It means that they've been admitted to schools where they're in over their heads. To admit these students makes white liberals feel better about themselves. It also helps support the jobs of black and white university personnel in charge of diversity and inclusion. The question for black people is whether we can afford to have the best of our youngsters demeaned, degraded, and possibly destroyed to make white liberals feel better about themselves. Thus wrote Professor Walt Williams, again, a respected economist and himself an African American. So I was chatting with Nancy about this in the car. We were on our way to a store we could get all of our organic foods that we eat and enjoy, our plant-based diet that is so life-transforming that we encourage you to do for yourself, because I'm not selling you anything with a plant-based diet, just encourage you. But anyway, we were driving in the car together, talking about this. And Nancy brought up something very obvious. The place to address this is not affirmative action in a university, but to work together as Americans and say, what can we do about the educational disparity in terms of the education of black Americans from K through 12? What can we do together to address that and to level that out? Because that's a big, big, big part of the problem. In other words, you're not going to, here, let's go back to diet, okay? If you eat unhealthily your whole life, all right, and now we're going to get you in a program to exercise more. We're going to get you exercising more and try to get you ready to play sports, and you're still eating unhealthily, you've already got 2.5 strikes against you. And the harder you push, it might be detrimental, because with a bad diet, you might really do something to yourself, all right? So in the case of kids, through no fault of their own, who've been raised in settings, be it inner city, be it other settings, where the educational system is subpar. And I'm not blaming educators. Some of you are working day and night. You're thinking we're underpaid, we're overworked. I'm not criticizing. I'm asking questions saying, how can we as a society try to address this together and work at this from one of the roots up, rather than trying to fix this when we've got the tree completely grown? Those are the questions that make more sense to me. Let's go even deeper. Let's go even deeper. If you look at the massive educational and economic achievements of Asian Americans, so higher than white Americans and therefore higher than Hispanic Americans, black Americans, so in terms of achievement, black Americans have achieved less than Hispanic Americans less than white Americans less than Asian Americans. All right, that's the way things are in our society, because those are just the realities, right? So what is it that you can look at in terms of Asian Americans? Well, more recent immigrants coming over, having to work harder. I remember teaching Korean students in 1982, and one of them was talking about their work ethic. And he said, look, we've come in as immigrants. You know, English is our second language, and we feel like we're at the back of the train, so we have to work even harder to get to the front of the train so our kids can have the best opportunities. Okay, I understand that ethic and that mindset. But if you look at the percentage of intact homes where mother and father are together raising their kids, it's higher among Asian Americans than among white Americans. It's massively higher in some cases when you look at all the stats. And it's massively, massively higher than in African American homes. Now, please hear me. I'm not saying this to throw stones. I'm not saying this from a position of superiority, looking down my big nose at people and saying, well, you just have to do something about it. No, quite the opposite. I'm saying as followers of Jesus, when we look at these realities, I understand there's no simple political solution. I know that there's no political savior. I understand that. I know we can't just snap our fingers and address this. But shouldn't our greater concern, those of us who love the Lord and love our neighbor, shouldn't our greater concern be what steps can we take constructively? And I don't have a lot of answers here. I have more questions than answers, but the questions that need to be asked. What constructive steps can we help to address this terrible problem of fatherlessness in the African American community? You say, well, it's the prison system and it's the okay. Well, let's look at that. Does there need to be more prison reform? Actually, President Trump took some major steps there. Is that part of the solution? Are there other things? You know, when someone's born with two strikes against them in the society, what can we do to try to level that out? We can't guarantee quality of outcome, but we're trying to guarantee quality of opportunity. So what can be done? What steps can be taken to address the educational disparities? What policies are unhelpful, be they Democratic policies or Republican policies for the school systems? What were those who are educators and those who I've got some colleagues that are educators on the front lines. I'm talking about children's education. I'm talking about in inner cities. And so these are the questions we're asking. What would you recommend? How can we as a body together care? How can we as a body together pursue? What does Jesus say? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. The kingdom of God, Paul says, is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. What can we do as a matter of righteousness? So this has nothing to do, zero to do with, quote, white guilt. The thought doesn't occur to me, does not exist in my brain whatsoever. Nothing to do with that whatsoever. Nor is it feeling a sense of responsibility for what was done centuries ago or generations ago by people completely unrelated to me. As my mother came over from England as a little girl, and my father's parents came over from Russia, and he was born in America speaking Yiddish before he ever spoke English. This is not a matter of laying guilt trips on people. It's saying affirmative action was playing a role. Doesn't look like it really accomplished the goals, in certain ways might have done more harm than good, and as a result discriminated against other people as well. But the disparities remain. As Glenn Loury says, things need to be done, but in his view, affirmative action was a distraction. So as best as I understand it, the Supreme Court got this right, and it was understood that affirmative action was not going to be here forever. But let's not stop the conversation there. Especially if you're an American, said, great decision, we love the decision, we applaud the decision. Let's not stop there. Let's say major disparities remain in our culture, still the legacy of the past. So how can we together address them? Say it's overwhelming. True, but maybe where we live, maybe being mentors, maybe being involved in different ways in schools, maybe coming alongside families. What can we do? Something to bring to the Lord, something to listen to our friends that are in the midst of these situations to say, hey, here's what we recommend, here's what we think would be helpful. Rather than us imposing our solution on someone, let's work with folks to say, hey, what do you think would be helpful? How can we come alongside of you? Throwing this out for discussion. Not trying to score political points or get you to like me or hate me. Just doing my best to be your voice for moral sanity and spiritual clarity. We'll be right back.
I'm Paul Burnett, a board-certified doctor of holistic health, and I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about the importance of healthy blood flow and how it's enhanced by a miracle molecule known as nitric oxide. You see, blood vessels release nitric oxide, which increases blood flow, known as something called vasodilation. At Trivita, we take blood flow seriously for our members, and we've developed a nitric oxide plus supplement that has been formulated with natural ingredients designed to maximize nitric oxide production in our blood vessels, which increases blood flow. You may be wondering why you don't have as much energy as you used to. One study that I came across revealed that by the age of 40, we only produce about 50% of the nitric oxide production as compared to our 20s. And by the age of 70, the study showed that we're only producing about 15 to 25%. I have good news. As we age, there's another way for our body to increase nitric oxide production, and that's by converting nitrates in vegetables like beetroot into nitric oxide. Bottom line, with more nitric oxide, we stimulate more blood flow to our vital organs, and we experience more energy while supporting healthy blood pressure. Trivita's Nitric Oxide Plus has been formulated to increase nitric oxide production and blood flow at every age.
To place your order for products to support your wellness goals, call 1-800-771-5584 or online at Trivita.com. As a Trivita introductory offer, use promo code BROWN25 and receive a 25% discount on the products of your choice. Call 1-800-771-5584. 800-771-5584. May you live with
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get on The Line of Fire by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Hey, let me encourage you to do this. Pick up the phone, call 800-771-5584. Tell them Dr. Brown sent you. 800-771-5584. Check out nitric oxide. That's the first Trivita product that I used and use it daily with great benefit. You may see a reduction in your blood pressure. You may see increased energy, oxygen flow. You may see it within a matter of days, weeks, certainly within a month. You see results. There's money-back guarantee. But it's a great way for you to invest in your own health and wellness, and a great way to support the Line of Fire. Remember, 100% of your first order will be donated to the Line of Fire, more than a tithe of all subsequent orders. So it's 800-771-5584. Check out nitric oxide, or go to Trivita.com. Be sure to use the code BROWN25, TRIVITA, Trivita.com. Use the code BROWN25. All right. The last Supreme Court case, the Christian postal worker, it wasn't a matter of taking a job and the job requires you to work, say, Sunday through Thursday. That's your work week. And you get Friday, Saturday off. And he said, no, I want you to structure the job for me. I don't want to work on Sundays, so I want you to structure the job for me. And because of my religious beliefs and wanting to be in church on Sunday, or believe that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, whatever, I want to be off on Sundays. No, that was not the case. This was not, for example, a Muslim going to the court and saying, well, the job requires me to work Monday through Friday, but Friday is the Muslim Sabbath, and therefore I asked the company to change the job structure for me, and they wouldn't, so I'm taking them to court. This wasn't an Orthodox Jew saying, my job requires me to work 6 days a week, including Saturdays. That's the normal work week here for everyone. And I asked them to restructure the job for me so that I would be free on Saturdays because I'm an Orthodox Jew who can't work on the Sabbath. It was not about any of those. It was about the U.S. Postal Service requiring a worker to do overtime on Sundays, and him saying, I can't do it because of my religious convictions. Sunday's a day I don't work. So that would be the same with an employer. You've got a Monday through Friday job, and they tell a religious Jew, no, everybody's working overtime. We've got this big project coming, so Everybody's working overtime. You'll be penalized if you don't. Sorry, I can't. It's the Sabbath, right? So that's what the case was. And of course, the right decision is we're not talking about restructuring a company based on your work habits. For example, you might be a mom with a few kids, a single mom, and you've got to get your kids into daycare at a certain time and pick them up at a certain time. And you go to work at a company and they say, oh, no, we need you here in the office at 8 and you do not get to leave until 5. I can't take that job. Or we often require our workers to be here on the weekends. This is just a given, and it's going to be a few times every year. You're going to have to work both Saturday and Sunday. All right, I can't take that job. Understood. When I was going to grad school and needed to be free to get to a class, so I could work 4.5 days a week. And then I had to be free after lunch to go to New York City for my classes in grad school. 1 or 2 classes in the afternoon and evening. So when I do job interviews, I tell them these are the hours I can work. And they were all sales jobs. And they would say, that works fine for us. Or they'd say, nope, that doesn't work. Okay, well, that's going in. We understand that. It's very different when the case is we're asking you to work overtime. Sorry, I can't because of my religious beliefs. And the court rightly ruled you can't force someone to do that. I mean, it's not like rocket science, difficult case here, and it should be self-evident. To me, the first case with graphic artist, web designer Laurie Smith, self-evident should have been 9-0. In terms of you cannot force someone to create artistic content contrary to their beliefs and convictions. The Christian postal worker also should have been 9-0, crystal clear, no real debate about that. The affirmative action, I could understand why that's more heated, why that's more complex, how that could be understood and taken in different ways. But the reaction to the other cases by many in the world, and I'm reading headline after headline after headline in terms of how terrible this is. And here, let me spot another headline. Where was this? The Guardian in the UK. Let me just see their headline there. U.S. Supreme Court strikes blow against LGBTQ plus rights with Colorado ruling. Totally false. Completely false. But that's the kind of stuff that's going to be put forward, and that's what we're going to hear day and night. So that brings me now to an entirely different point. I love truth. I love study. I love to learn. I love to analyze things as honestly as I can. Of course, I pray. Of course, I ask God for insight. But as I'm asking God for insight, I don't need to pray about whether 1 + 1 is 2 or 2 + 2 is 4. I don't need to ask God, open my eyes to this reality, because it is simple in front of our eyes. There are many complex, difficult situations where we need God's wisdom and God's insight. And there are situations that only have spiritual solutions, all right? But there are other things that are just facts, truth. You study, you learn. For example, if I say 2 + 2 = 4, that's math. That's not the ABCs. If I say CAT spells cat, that's spelling. That's not math, right? If I say that the Earth derives its heat from the sun rather than from Pluto, that's not a philosophical argument. These are just scientific facts. So it is frustrating if you love people and you love truth to see blatant deception. I mean, outright deception, falsehood, fraud, perpetuated through people, perpetrated on people, and when you come with truth to them, they completely write you off. They don't even have an ear to hear it because of their religious presuppositions or their spiritual presuppositions or their political presuppositions or their racial presuppositions, whatever it is. There's not even the possibility of them hearing what you say. It's as if you're speaking gibberish to them. I'm not talking about having a debate about a passage in the Bible that could be interpreted one way or another, and we're debating that. or having a debate over a doctrinal dispute that the church has been disputing for 2,000 years. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that are blatantly false. For example, Adolf Hitler was not Chinese, right? And he was not trying to exterminate Mandarin Chinese people. That's simply fact, okay? Just simple fact. Donald Trump is not an African American. That is simple fact, right? And I go on endlessly, right? So it's frustrating when you present truth to people, but because of the degree of their biases and the degree of their blindness, that they're incapable of even hearing it, even seeing it. And this frustrates me not on a personal level because I want to be right, but because I want to help people. You know, it would be like the ambulance arrives to rush you to the hospital after you've had a heart attack, but you're convinced that it's someone trying to kidnap you and kill you so you don't get in the ambulance. Like, we just want to help you because you're going to die. So that's what motivates me. That's what burdens me. And as I'll look at comments to different videos of ours on YouTube or comments to different posts, it's one thing to have differences of opinion. Have at it. It's one thing to differ over complex, debatable issues. It's another thing to embrace, to believe, to follow complete, utter falsehoods. That's burdensome to me because I care about people and I want them to know the truth. But here's what I've been reminded of, and I really feel the need to pray into this even more. It's Paul's words in 2 Timothy chapter 2. And I want to read this to you, 2 Timothy chapter 2. And he says this, "And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will." In other words, the issue is to pray for that person to have a heart change, because you can show them 2 + 2 is 4 till you're blue in the face, and they won't hear you because they've already prejudged you or because they are that blinded. But what does Paul write in 2 Corinthians 4:4? The God of this world has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. All of us at one time outside of Jesus were spiritually blind. All of us outside of Jesus at one time were spiritually deaf. We're spiritually dead. And it's the grace and mercy of God that open our hearts and open our minds. So if you feel that same holy frustration because you want to help people and they just don't have ears to hear or eyes to see, no matter how clear and factual and real your presentation is, remember, it's ultimately a spiritual battle. Remember that the same God that had mercy on you and me can have mercy on others and can deliver them from the snare of Satan. And when they're delivered, when their eyes are opened, it will be the great awakening for them, and they'll come hugging you and thanking you. Right now, we've got to battle for them in prayer.